Hello and welcome to the Jaipur Dialogues. Today is the first day of the Indic Mega Week, and tonight we are going to organize a very interesting discussion between two panelists, none of whom require any introduction to you, Abhijit Iyer Mitra and Sanjay Dixit ji. So the topic of the discussion is nullifying Article 370 and enacting CAA, which is basically the new book of Shri Sanjay Dixit ji, which is coming out soon in the market. So I welcome you both, Sanjay sir and Abhijit. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Abhinav ji.
So basically,
thank you, Jai Bhavani.
Jai Shri Ram. So basically, on the 5th of August, as we know that two historic dates are going to coincide. One is the Bhumi Pujan of the Ram Mandir, that after 5 centuries, you will have something extraordinary happening in India, that people who had lost their places of worship are now at least reclaiming one of them. And second one is the nullification of Article 370, which happened last year. Why this is very important is that it has rattled the opponents outside India and both inside India. And when Article 370 was repealed, we could see how Pakistan was rattled. And later on, when Citizenship Amendment Act was enacted in India, we have seen that how there was an attempt to burn down the entire country in the name of opposition to the CAA and NRC. But why is that happening? What are the deep causes behind it? What is the root cause behind this kind of anarchism that we have become so used to? And what is the guiding ideological force behind these kind of attacks on India? As I say that, suddenly you see the hostility against India and especially Hindus after 370 was removed and CA was passed is unprecedented, not just in India, but across the world. It looks like that Marathas are back in Delhi, and the entire all your enemies are mobilizing both inside and outside India. So today we are trying to make some sense of it. So before I begin this discussion, I'd like Sanjay sir to please give a brief introduction of the book and the basic argument he has presented in the book.
Actually, if you look at the reason for coming out with this book was that because after the Article 370 was nullified, I call it nullification because that is how technically it is. So a lot of people call it removal, scrapping, or whatever, because Article 370 still stands on the Constitution, in a totally diluted form. So this nullification is presented a different kind of, as you were mentioning, but different kind of challenges before it. Before the people who did not like Article 370, as I always said a number of times, I've said this in past, it was a concession to the two-nation theory by a polity that opposed the partition of India initially, saying that they did not accept the two-nation theory. And after they got the transfer of power, after they got the power, they immediately conceded this two-nation theory in the name of internationalism, or in the face of blackmail by Sheikh Abdullah, because India had blundered into going to the United Nations, and it was feared that a plebiscite would actually take place. Anybody who knows strategic affairs, I think Abhijit would probably vouch for it, he would not have fallen for this. But then our good old first Prime Minister, being the naive man that he was, he fell for Sheikh Abdullah's blackmail, and that blackmail actually led to this concession. And this concession was rationalized in so many ways, and that's how we had this Article 370. Now, why I have done this book is because most of the discussion that took place after the nullification of Article 370 was rather superficial, and hardly any of that got into the deep. They just did not go into the deeper reasons of why the partition had actually happened, and whether there was any connection with Article 370 happening and the forces that led to the partition. And that is how I decided to go back into history. And I traced those very ideological forces that caused the partition, and that caused the events before the partition, and that are active even after the partition. These are the same forces that caused Shah Bano. These are the same forces that caused what is called the CAA, anti-CAA agitation. These are all same forces in different descriptions.
In
That
fact,
is
you
why
go
I
back,
thought
yeah.
that this kind of a book was necessary.
In fact, you go much beyond that. You basically try to construct an ideological basis to it, which you say that is basically the establishment of the Medina project in the subcontinent. So you are tracing the roots of this thing to the Khilafat movement, and then you actually say that what is happening today in India, especially on the streets of Delhi, is Khilafat 2.0 and direct action 2.0. So could you please elaborate on that argument? Because you are giving the ideological framework to the entire thing, not necessarily just in a strategic contest.
Yes, if we say Khilafat 2.0, this was painted all over the streets of Delhi. In fact, when the agitation, the anti-CAA agitation began in Jamia Millia Islamia, they painted the walls with Khilafat 2.0. So when they say Khilafat 2.0, then we have to go back and find out what Khilafat 1.0 was. So Khilafat 1.0 was actually a revival of the caliphate, or rather prevention of the demolition of the caliphate, which was almost imminent at that time, not just from the allied forces, but also from within, because the Turks had got totally fed up of this caliphate and this Khilafat-e-Usmaniya. Now, Khilafat-e-Usmaniya was well on its way out. It was absolutely obvious. But even then, the people here, the Islamic rulers in India, had always ruled on behalf of the caliph till the time of Akbar. Akbar was the first person who went out of the caliphate, and in fact, he became himself some kind of a caliph. And that is how we derive the validity of the Mohammedan law in India, and which is Fatwa Alamgiri. The Fatwa Alamgiri is the law. If you have heard Asad Owaisi proclaim very loudly that they follow the Fatwa Alamgiri, so that is the basis. So now what they were doing when they were doing Khilafat 1.0, they basically were pitching for India to go back under the aegis of the caliph. And Indian National Congress was happy to go along with them. That is Khilafat 1.0. That is that supremacist ideology which proclaims very loudly that Islam is the master faith, exactly as Hitler had said that Germans were the master race. So here is the master faith that is ready to reclaim its mantle as the Mughal Empire, or Mughal Empire, another Mughal Empire ruling on behalf of the Caliph. Even today, I don't know whether you read some Urdu newspapers and Urdu periodicals, which I do from time to time because I can read and write Urdu. And this message is absolutely clear that all of them are pining and longing for that same old Mughal Empire that went away from them. And that was, of course, taken away by Marathas. That is a fact that is hidden, and poor Mir Jafar is made the fall guy unnecessarily, according to me. So Khilafat 1.0 is very relevant. So Khilafat 1.0 is relevant. What is Khilafat needs to be explained, how it proceeded, how the different sects of Islam, they interacted with each other, what were their positions, what happened during the partition. All that becomes very relevant. And once you have that, then you find yourself the reasons for the CAA very easy to discern.
Yep. In fact, when you're talking about Mir Jafar, I have read that he was demonized in such a manner because he was a Shia. So it was easy to demonize him in the nationalist movement because our nationalist movement was appeasing the Sunni majoritarianism in India. But that's a different kind of a debate. But interesting. So you have made a interesting point about the long-term project of this ideology, which continues to bleed the entire subcontinent. Let's say not just India, but even the other parts of the subcontinent. So I'd like to come to Abhijit Iyer Mitra. Abhijit, how do you locate this nullification of Article 370 and the enactment of CAA both, let's say, in the larger geopolitical situation of the world, and especially what is happening in the Indian subcontinent?
I'm glad that you brought in Mir Jafar in this particular context, because I'm going to locate it in terms of the Shia-Sunni dynamic, number one, and number two, how this is played out. In both cases, what you've seen is ever since the Islamic Revolution, so-called Islamic Revolution in 1979 in Iran, India's been kind of more friendlier with Iran, and Iran has been trying to help us out every now and then. Not much, but whatever they can. As opposed to Saudi Arabia and the Gulf states, which even though we had excellent so-called people-to-people contact with them, were implacably hostile to India on the international stage. And what they've been realizing of late is that the need to contain Iran has been quite great. So ever since Mohammed bin Salman, the crown prince of Saudi Arabia, really took over the reins of power, if you've seen, there's been a complete 180-degree about turn on Saudi policy, and they've started supporting India to a large extent. Now, this then lays the context for understanding what is happening now. You see, the Shias were, like all of you pointed out, were kind of, they've always been, in terms of mercantilism, far, far ahead of the Sunnis. They didn't have power in the first place to lose power, as opposed to Sunnis who could never reconcile losing power in the subcontinent. And what's happened is, after that brief 30, 40 year, since 1979, so 40-year sort of Shia renaissance in India, and I won't say renaissance, sort of, the BJP sort of looking after and the Shia in a sense. Now the Sunni countries are playing for this gambit that look after the Sunnis in India as well. This is what has been happening with the Arab world on the international stage. You're going to see this 15 to 20 years down, the effects of this 15 to 20 years down the line, when the domestic Sunni are through what is preached through Saudi-funded seminaries, turned more into a sort of a BJP vote bank. Possibly, I don't think it'll happen, but there's certainly a project for that going on at the moment. In the same way as the Shias were seen as being sympathetic to the BJP. Remember was it the Dawoodi Sayyidina? The Sayyidina of the Dawoodi Bohras, who said,
Yes.
He's said it on 2 occasions now, you should come out and vote for the BJP. I found this in Kashmir, that the Shias are seen as the mukhbirs, the informers of the Indian government after the Pandits were kicked out. So, and the Shias have generally been a lot more open to voting for the BJP, simply because they're not at the bottom of the economic ladder. They're way ahead of the Sunnis in that. So this is number one. There's the Shia-Sunni dynamic. Number two is the complete divorcing of, facts from the narratives that we're hearing. Isn't it amazing that none of these countries, Germany, France, Britain, America, ever bothered formally condemning either of these things, either Article 370 or CAA? What condemnations were even watered down to the point of being, you need to look after human rights. That's about it. They didn't even condemn human rights violations. They said you need to look after it. That's about it. The Sunni countries couldn't really give a damn. They threw Pakistan under the bus and the protesters under the bus. Now, we are somehow meant to believe That's some deluded echo chamber journalists living in Delhi who keep going back to the same people, because you see them in Khan Market every day. You see that they only go interview the people they want to hear, not the people they need to hear. Huge difference. Because like if you're like Bari Weiss or that deputy editor of the New York Times, you lose your jobs if you interview people you need to hear. We all know that. That is how the New York Times works these days, presumably the Washington Post as well. Washington Post, of course, has that reporter Neha Masih, who was completely concocting, fabricating stories out of thin air over Kashmir. She was staying in the same hotel I was. There's a kids clinic opposite it, which was open, which was chock-a-block full. The hotel manager told me that he told her, you need to go check out this hospital and things like that, because it was full. She did not, and she concocted her own story. So this is the kind of rubbish. But it's fine, because they've lost all policy relevance in America in that sense. But third, and the most sort of self-defeating aspect of all of this has been the complete incompetence of the Indian government in putting the Indian message across. Because remember, you're not countering government narratives. You're not countering a Muslim country narrative. They've all said that, these protesters and all this is rubbish. India's right in what it's doing. The problem is the public perception battle, which ultimately filters into the policy discourse. Not right now, but it will filter in 3-4 years down the line. Because remember, Richard Nixon's hatred for India stemmed off his personal hatred from Nehru and Indira Gandhi. And this is something we don't realize, that personal dislikes can become a major part of public policy. And in both of these instances, Article 370 and Delhi riots, the conduct of this government in terms of public relations has been nothing short of calamitous. They refused to put out a government version of events after the Delhi riots. And, because in India, petulance is what passes off as foreign policy. When the foreign minister then denies the Council on Religious Freedoms visas, everybody's clapping. Of course, nobody wants to hold the foreign minister to account for what was the Council on Foreign Relations meant to base its statements on, other than what was reported in those echo chamber newspapers, because the government of India never actually put out, there were no daily briefings, and you never put out a different side of the story. So these are three aspects that we need to look at quite clearly now.
That's interesting. So basically, it has much to do with the changing larger geopolitical situation in the world. So we have seen that it's mostly Turkey and Malaysia who are making the most noise, while the Gulf countries were hardly saying anything about it. But we'll come back to that point, Abhijit. But Sanjay sir, how do you see the Pakistan's reaction to both the NRC and CAA? Why it is so rattled suddenly?
Pakistan's reaction is very interesting. In fact, what happened was that I think this 5th of August was the day when this happened. And around about 15th, I wrote a piece. And I said that the Project Medina is over and you understand the predicament of Pakistan. And my word, the way that article went, I think I wrote it on medium.com. They thought that some kind of a spam was taking place. And they actually put a filter on it, a spam filter. And I had to rescue it, and then I had to not only put it on Medium, I had to put it on other portals. And together, within 3 or 4 days, it had done about 1 million views. And what I said in that article, and a modified form of that article is also included in this book, was that I took everybody back to that discourse which was taking place pre-partition between the two major sects of Deobandis and Barelvis. And both of them were absolutely unanimous on the Islamization project for India. They were very clear that, okay, we had to take it back to the Mughal Empire. We had to take it back to the days of Aurangzeb. Aurangzeb, the great Wali. We may all despise Aurangzeb for his bigotry and for his destruction and for the utter plunder that he put all of India to. But then we must realize that all of Sunni Islam in India, the Hanafi Islam, views Aurangzeb as the Wali. Wali is the friend of Allah. So that being the case, there was complete unanimity, and we know the Fatwa Alamgiri is the Mohammedan law. The British recognized it as such. There was complete unanimity that the ultimate objective of Islam in India was a complete Islamization of India. But they differed on the method. The Deobandis thought that it was okay to take the help of the Kafirs in order to achieve their objectives, and that's how that Khilafat movement was headed mostly by Deobandis, with only a smattering of your Barelvis and the little bit of Shia. We must also know, which most people do not know in India, that Barelvi is basically the Barelvi clan, which was established in the, I think, around about 1904 or so, by Ahmad Raza Barelvi, is actually a federation of all the Sufis in India. Devbandi is a different sect in the sense that they do follow the Fatwa Alamgiri, but there is a small theological difference on the nature of the prophet and the nature of the prophethood. It has nothing to do with their animosity with the Kafirs. That stays the same with both of them. So it was mainly a difference in tactics, where Devbandi said that if we partition, then our Islamization project will suffer very badly. We will lose control over almost 2/3 to 3/4 of the Indian land mass, and it will become very difficult for us to carry out this project. Whereas the Barelvi said that we follow what is called the Medina strategy of the Prophet. How they take everybody back right to the 7th century, and they say that, okay, when the Prophet was not getting his way in Mecca, then he did Hijrat. He went into exile into Medina. He went into Medina. Then there he consolidated the faith, built up his forces, and after he was strong, then he attacked Mecca and won Mecca back. So what we are doing is that we are going to Pakistan, which is our new Medina, and we will consolidate ourselves, become strong in faith, and become strong in muscle power. And after that, we will easily take over these little Kafirs. After all, one Momin is equal to 10 Kafirs anyway. That's written in the Quran. So that's how the narrative went. And the wily politician that Jinnah was, he took the help of Barelvis, and after he had won Pakistan, and he dumped the Barelvis. So much so that the three main Barelvi ideologues who were key to this entire Naya Medina project, the two sons of Ahmad Raza Barelvi, Hamid and Mustafa, and a very important Sufi cleric called Naimuddin Muradabadi. All of them stayed back in India. They went to Pakistan, found that nobody was listening to them. Deobandis and this Abul Ala Maududi, the Jamaat-e-Islami guy, they were gaining currency over there. So they came back, and ultimately they spent their last days in India only. And these Deobandis guys, they sulked. This Mahmood Madni, Hussain Mahmood Madni, he went into a sulk because he was working for what is called a Qawmiyat Muttahida, composite nation. And the Barelvis were working for Qawmiyat Judagla, this separate nation. And separate, not just a separate nation, but separate and equal nation. So after the Naya Medina happened, they got a separate nation, and after that the quest for equality started. And if you look at the motto of the establishment, which is basically the Pakistan Army, their motto says the same thing. It says Taqwa, Iman, Jihad, Jihad fi sabilillah. Jihad fi sabilillah is a violent kind of a jihad. So it is basically the motto of an Islamic Lashkar. So Pakistan Army envisions itself as an Islamic Lashkar. And that is how they envision themselves, that they would ultimately follow the Prophet and attack India after consolidating themselves and win back Delhi and re-establish the Mughal Empire. This Article 370, that pierces a dagger through this whole narrative, this nullification of Article 370, because that was their first frontier. They had to start from there. They thought they almost had it. And then suddenly, with the nullification, they saw it slipping out. So that is why it became some kind of an existential issue for Pakistan. That's why I call it that you have to understand their predicament. They have lost the reason for their existence. Their raison d'etre is gone.
So basically, Pakistan Army is the only army in the world, if I'm not wrong, which has jihad as its official motto. Am I right, Abhijit? So where do you think, Abhijit, the response of Pakistan in this entire thing? How do you see the Pakistan's position now? As Sanjay sir is saying that, by losing Kashmir entirely, Pakistan has lost its rationale for existence, so to say. It has created a crisis in the Pakistani mind and in their national self-image. So how do you see Pakistan has responded to it? What will Pakistan do in the future?
Look, first, Pakistan hasn't lost Kashmir in any sense of the word, because the abrogation of 370 was only one step. Remember, Kashmir is a conflict economy. Every single player out there is incentivized in the conflict, monetarily incentivized in the conflict. And almost 55 to 60% of the population, their livelihood depends on the conflict in some way or another. So Pakistan definitely hasn't lost it, because India failed to carry through all the corollary, ancillary actions that we should have taken. Deconflicting the economy, corruption inquiries, a whole bunch of steps. And now we've actually taken one step back with the domicile laws, and the standard defense as well. Other states also have it. Well, Kashmir wasn't the other state. Kashmir was the thorn in your side. It was the problem child. That is why it required an extraordinary set of measures, which you are refusing to do in that sense. But remember, the thing about Pakistan is, and we seem to keep forgetting this, Pakistan does not want to resolve Kashmir because the little coterie that runs Pakistan needs a constant state of external war. Remember, Pakistan is not their country in that sense. They all have houses in Dubai, Boston, London, California, what have you. And Pakistan is that little project. They run it the same way that European nobility. So, for example, the Tsars of Russia, ever since Catherine the Great's husband, didn't have a drop of Russian blood in them. They were all Germans. So for them, Russia was a country that they could do whatever they wanted with, whenever they wanted, and so on and so forth. So, there is this thing that we keep assuming that Pakistan will absolutely want Kashmir 100% and so on and so forth, when in fact, giving them Kashmir, they will lose their big, losing the Kashmir cause, not losing Kashmir, is very important to them. They operate on the basis of loss of face. If you can hide Balakot happening, then Balakot did not happen. It was a great victory for Pakistan, according to them. 1965, they celebrate as Air Force Day because, according to them, in 1965, their Air Force hammered the living daylights out of us. Right? If you can't prove something, they claim it as a victory and they use it as a morale booster. The problem with 1971, when we took 93,000 of their troops prisoner, and we, bifurcated Pakistan, there was no way you could spin it as a victory. And that was the problem with what happened in Kashmir with Article 370. It is at best superficial, because everybody tells you. I was quite surprised to read Omar Abdullah's interview with, was it Nidhi Razdan, or was it the Hindu or the Indian Express, something like that, I don't know, where he says, it was our one anchor, we needed it. And then at the same time, Congress apologists will tell you 370 was completely hollow. It meant nothing. So if you've taken away something hollow, then why are you cribbing about it? So understand, there is this nexus between Kashmiri politicians who are allowed to live as long as they toe the Pakistani propaganda line, and very frequently peddle the Pakistani propaganda line out here, and our own sort of superficial actions, because unfortunately what it is distilling down to, with the benefit of hindsight, is that this is very much a superficial action, because all the necessary security measures, the institutional reforms, and things that you needed in Kashmir are now not going to happen. It is the same people in charge. In all likelihood, even the political parties, there was a plan to bypass the PDP and the National Conference and turn it into true grassroots democracy where, actual people would come to power. It'll be like a city council, corporation, municipal thing, which was also a politically smart strategy. Today, we're not seeing that again. These deals have been made with the Abdullahs, wherein there's some kind of backdoor to power for them, held out as a sort of carrot. So Pakistan had a panic reaction. That is all. Okay, they are going to do what they normally do, which is the one tool that they have, which is to increase terrorism, to kill off politicians who don't toe their line, and so on and so forth, which would have been much more difficult if you had gone in for the grassroots democracy you actually wanted. Now we're kind of slowly handing it over to them. So what hope I had when this process began, I no longer have, because I see this, backslide back to the same old power equations run by the same old puppet masters as before.
Interesting. So basically, we can expect to see more trouble in the Kashmir in the coming days.
Are you asking
quite
me?
a bit more. Look, there are two kinds of trouble. Abhinav, who are you asking, me or? Okay. There are two kinds of trouble. One was if we had maintained our course of action and done the secondary and second order policy reforms and third order policy reforms that are required in Kashmir, we would have seen a sharp uptick in violence once lockdown was, as in 370 lockdown, not COVID lockdown, important to remember that, was removed. Because it is only when you are combating the status quo that the maximum resistance happens. So our initial estimates were that starting sometime in this summer, violence was going to spike massively and remain at extremely high levels for the next 2 years at least. And then the proper, tapering down of violence would happen like it did in Punjab. Remember, at one point, everybody was saying Punjab was lost to India. And today, Punjab is almost perfectly normal state. I mean, there are things out there as well, but it's as normal as can be given its traumatic history. On the other hand, there is a second kind of violence, which is where you have a triumphal foreign power increasing violence to show you that they are in charge. I fear that we had foreseen the earlier sort of semi-positive end goal violence in mind, but what we are seeing now is the second entirely negative kind of violence. It is going to spike, and unfortunately, the window of opportunity is lost, and we're not going to be able to control it anytime soon. So if you think Punjab is going to happen to Kashmir, it's not going to happen.
Okay. So, Sanjay sir, coming back to you.
Yeah.
The logical progression of this entire Medina project has been, as you have argued in the book, is the CAA rights in Delhi and in the other parts of the country. So now we have charge sheets which are being filed. We have arrests. Several people have been arrested, and most of them are highly educated people. So it's not that you have the uneducated person who is writing on the street. You have the people who understand polity, who are formidable enemies in the sense that they understand the geopolitics, they understand the historical method, and most of them are young students. How do you see this thing? What's your take on this entire phenomenon, which you call as the Khilafat 2.0?
I will address this, but I'll just do a brief rejoinder to what Abhijit said about Kashmir. I'm not as pessimistic about the situation as he is, because you see, the umbilical cord among the people was the Article 370, because I have seen this and I have gone very deep into the issue, is that particular psychological thing that was there, that we are separate. That is why we have the CC 370, and at various places Pakistan even claim credit for it. Surreptitiously, of course, never openly. And the politics of Abdullah, politics of muftis and all that, I have detailed it out in the book. That is why I've written such a detailed account, giving the background of 370 as to how the religion, particularly that particular brand of religion, that Jamaat-e-Islami Jammu and Kashmir, that played in this whole scenario. And Jamaat-e-Islami Jammu and Kashmir is definitely an instrument, policy instrument of the government of Pakistan. And that is why when I write, in the postscript, I write the way forward in Kashmir. There's something that I've very clearly delineated, that there is no way forward unless you are able to finish off this cancer of Jamaat-e-Islami Jammu and Kashmir. So to that extent, I agree that this particular aspect, somehow, I think that has been a cancer that we have battled right through our history, and that is political correctness. And whenever we need to take hard decisions, there's some kind of a political correctness kicks in. And it is that political correctness that is preventing us in going after the radicalizing elements that are hiding below the surface, and they've always hidden below the surface ostensibly. So everybody knew who they were and what they were doing, and they were not tackled. So it is critical to handle them, but to completely de-link that, no, because 370 happened and there was a panic reaction in Pakistan. There was a reason for a panic reaction. They have to contain the panic reaction. They write their textbook their own way and they get lampooned for it. We know that very well. But to say that it is not some kind of a salutary measure, that I would beg to disagree with Abhijit on that point. Having said that, let's come to your question. The question about the CAA being a logical extension of Khilafat 1.0 and the partition movement. You see, again, I have done this in fair detail.
I'd like you to respond on something else. Is the riots which happened specifically?
No, I'm coming to
and
that.
The kind of people who were leading the riot.
Yes. I'm coming to that. I'm coming to that. And that is something that I explained right in the beginning in the first chapter of the book. And that is that Dr. Ambedkar, I quoted, and Dr. Ambedkar said that the nature of Muslim politics in India is gangsters' method of politics. Has that changed? What it was in the late 19th century, in the 20th century, early 20th century, during the partition, after the partition, forget Pakistan, in India, has that changed? That hasn't changed one bit. It continues to be the same. It continues to be the same because we have kept dealing with the same persons as we did before the partition, and that is the Mullah Maulana Ashrafia class. And the Mullah Maulana Ashrafia class is deeply invested into that doctrine that I explained earlier. That Mughal Empire doctrine is the doctrine of the Ashrafia class, which is about 3-4% of the total Muslim population. But because of that peculiar doctrine of what is called taqleed, where the normal public is not supposed to even use what is called aql or reason in the matters of religion. And in Islam, you know, everything is a matter of religion. So they are not supposed to use this. Only this Ashrafia class is supposed to exercise it. We have done nothing. We have simply played into their hand. We have negotiated with it. With all they have become the kind of middlemen between the general Muslim population and the powers that be. The Indian National Congress did that for 70 years. And even when the BJP, the so-called nationalist forces, have come into power, I don't say that they're doing it that way because, of course, there is a deep distrust. They're not their voters, so they won't do it in the same manner. But there is an unwillingness to take them on. And that is reflected in the kind of treatment that Maulana Saad and Imam Bukhari get as compared to some other people from the majority community. That we have seen it all along. And the way the reaction is when this Lutyens class takes up some kind of a fringe issue and blows it up, the kind of reaction that you get from the government is totally different from even something as calamitous or as catastrophic as lynching of some innocent sadhus in the presence of police. Even that doesn't seem to evoke the kind of reaction which say a fake narrative of some thief getting beaten up and dying because of that beating. That kind of a narrative always works here. That is that apologetic attitude. So that has always worked. So that gangster's method of politics is one. And then I have quoted H.V. Seshadri. And I think that is something in the earlier also I had narrated it. I think that is something that needs to be read out in full. And you give me a minute. Yeah, this is page 5 of the book. And right in chapter 1, Partition of Bengal. And what H.V. Seshadri in his book, Muslim Separatism, Causes and Consequences, quoted by Sitaram Goyal in his book, he says, I'll read it out in full because I think you should not miss even a word of that. He says, to start with, we want to take up what we consider to be its most important contribution, namely the unraveling of two behavior patterns, Muslim and national, which collaborated closely for years and precipitated partition in the final round. Okay? The Muslim behavior pattern was characterized by, please listen very carefully. The Muslim behavior pattern was characterized by acrimony, accusations, complaints, demands, denunciations, and street riots. The national behavior pattern, on the other hand, was characterized by acquiescence, assent, cajolery, concessions, cowardice, self-reproach, and surrender. Now, my point is that the two behavior patterns remain the same. And if the two behavior patterns remain the same, then it is foolish to expect different results.
Interesting. So let's hope our government and Indian state is more wiser than before. I expect the audience to keep asking questions because just after this one last question from Abhijit, we'll be taking up the audience questions. So Abhijit, we have discussed a lot about international context. We have discussed a lot about Pakistan, and mostly the discussion revolves around Pakistan. But we also have an eastern frontier where you have Bangladesh. How do you see the impact of Bangladesh in this entire equation, and also impact on Bangladesh of CAA especially?
I'm not seeing much of an impact on Bangladesh. I'll just answer this question, and there's 2 points to add to what Sanjay ji just said. See, the thing in Bangladesh is it's moving on a completely different trajectory. Ever since Sheikh Hasina came, she keeps her nose out of Indian internal politics. The only time it became an issue was during the Rohingya thing. Otherwise, Bangladesh has kept its nose out mostly. And both CAA and 370, there is not really an issue. There was an official protest in the sense because they got upset that, given her own and her father's secular credentials, that we presumed, she felt humiliated that we said that Hindus are persecuted in Bengal. In Bangladesh. Now, the reality is they are persecuted in Bangladesh, including by her own father. Let's not forget. He refused to rebuild the Dhakeshwari temple that was destroyed by Pakistani forces in 1971. And so on and so forth. She still refuses to rebuild it at the original site. So there are issues out there, but that's fine. That is still manageable out here. What is happening in Bangladesh is slightly different because Sheikh Hasina has gotten rid, this is the risk I'm talking about. Sheikh Hasina has gotten rid of the opposition. The only opposition you see are the Jamaat-e-Islami types, the same theology as our own Jamaat-e-Islami, and this nexus that they're forming with the army. Now, the army is being kept quiet with purchases based on their own booming economy, but you are beginning to see a slow and gradual the army is acting as the center around which all opposition to Sheikh Hasina is aggregating. And that is going to be quite problematic. This is why we needed a strong opposition in Bangladesh. And I fear that sometime, I could be wrong on this, but it could come back to haunt us, number one. Number two, I just wanted to add something more to what Sanjay ji said about gangster politics. Remember, so Sunni Muslim society in India, we continued feudalism. We never entered the Industrial Revolution. The Mughal Empire began as a feudal empire, it ended as a feudal empire. And to this day, Sunni society, because of that baggage, remains a feudal society. The way the Pakistani elites treat Pakistan, the Sunni elites in this country have treated other Sunnis. They don't care in what squalor Sunnis live. They don't care if Sunnis live or die, as long as they can use them for their personal gain and extortion from the government. They're quite happy to lose people. You know, they're jaake maro kaum ke liye and so on and so forth. And they are the ones who walk away with the benefits, college seats for their son, land, whatnot. I mean, one of the biggest land grabbers is the Shahi Imam of the Jama Masjid. I don't need to remind you that of how many cases he has against him, all of which get dropped by everyone. Even the BJP is too scared to pursue those cases against him. Why? Okay, and this has been the way of Sunni politics in this country. The Sunni elite use their populations, and they are the ones who gets the benefit, not the populations who die, sacrifice, whatever for the calm, quote unquote. Number one. Number two, again, to buttress what Sanjay ji was saying about narratives. See, the problem here is we somehow think that a lot of these narratives are English language narratives, and we don't need to worry about them because they don't filter down to the lower sections of the population, the vernacular speakers of the population. Mostly true. So, for example, with things like Rafale or so on and so forth, these are very esoteric concepts. You know, defense has never really won you an election in a sense. It has lost you an election like Bofors, but that was a combination of different things. But that is not entirely true. And this is where the BJP is going to learn, I'm afraid, a bad lesson at some point of time, because the chickens are going to come home to roost. Stories start off in the English financial press. Okay, Business Standard, Bloomberg, what have you. They then migrate to the English mainstream press, Hindu, NDTV, whatnot. And then, because of the normative power of the English press, and because they are the ones who give the peer validation to all the other vernacular dailies, they are the ones who act as the gate, the interpreters of India to the West. They are the ones who validate vernacular journalists. And it is their narratives that trickle down to the vernacular press. And that is the real danger out here, because at some point, this narrative is going to get down to the vernacular press. And that is where this complete lack of communications management in the English language is going to come to bite the BJP.
Very interesting point, and I also agree with that, Abhijit, that English press is very, very important. That its number of circulation will not actually reflect the power and the importance it holds. And also, there's the importance of documentation, right? That who is writing the books today, who is creating reports, because 50 years down the line, that will become the history. So, okay, I mean, I think we have a very interesting topic at hand, and discussions can go on and on for a while, but I think it's time to take some questions. So I'll be taking some questions now. So my first question is by Ajay Nair. What is the Pakistani obsession with Kashmir? They have already let go of Bangladesh and Pashtun and other areas. I think this thing has been more or less answered, but if Sanjay sir, do you want to answer this thing? Because it's again the same thing.
Is it, sir?
Pakistani obsession with Kashmir.
What is the last line?
I don't know. I think he wants to write.
Well, as far as the, I think Abhijit did sum it up, that, and I also said it in different manner, that it is the Ashrafia class, the Sunni Muslim elite, that controls the narrative. And because of the indoctrination, of what is called taqleed, non-use of aql or reason by the public, they are completely, as far as the narrative is concerned, in the thrall of their Maulana class. And that is why I think there are many things that I do not agree with Hussain Haqqani with. But the title of his book, that Pakistan between mosque and the military, is absolutely apt and correct. because that is how Pakistan operates, and that is the elite. There is an unholy nexus between the military and the Ashrafiya Maulana class, and that is how Pakistan is run. And because they are overwhelmingly Punjabi, so there is a very deep ethnic fault line, and that deep ethnic fault line is displayed in the insecurities of the Baloch, the Pashtuns, and that is all happening. But unless there is some kind of an international recognition and international help, I do not see these areas going away, especially Balochistan. So there's a lot of people who say that Balochistan is ripe for a revolution, but there's minimum conditions that are required for a separation of an area and a territory to happen do not seem to be available in Balochistan. They do not have enough population. They do not have what is called one party leading them. Say even their insurgencies are divided into many factions. And even more important, they do not have any contiguous territory helping them, because Balochistan is actually the original Balochistan is spread across Pakistan, Afghanistan, and Iran. And Iran and Afghanistan, which form the contiguous boundary with Balochistan, they are also not interested. It is something like a Kurdistan situation. In fact, I have greater hope from the Pashtuns, because Pashtuns they have a good population. They are also well armed willy-nilly by the Pakistani army itself, and they have almost an equal number of Pashtuns living in Afghanistan. And that is why Pakistan is always keen to keep Afghanistan under its thrall, under its thumb. So that's how I look at this situation. Yeah, next question is coming.
Abhijit, this question is for you because you have been very critical of the BJP. So do we have only BJP as option? We means the people on the right-hand side of the ideological spectrum, or who are nationalists. Because let's be fair, I mean, you are a critique of the BJP, Abhijit, but no other party would have done these things.
I agree. So here's the issue. We are stuck in a monopoly situation where the BJP is the least worst of all the options we have. It doesn't make it a good option, but it is the least worst option. They are the least loony woke. They are the least loony socialist. They are the least anti-Hindu. So, you know, it is what it is. And unfortunately, yes, it is a monopoly. The danger in all of this is we are putting all our eggs in one basket. So you've traditionally had 3-4 strains. You've had the economic right. You've had Hindutva right. You've had, and a few more. I mean, there's about 16, 17 spectrums of what calls itself the non-left in India. And the issue is they were all, sort of aligned, not entirely in circles. So there was always a subset in between which aligned, but mostly they were all separate circles. Today, you have perfect alignment. And you know what? When the sun and the moon get in perfect alignment, it's called an eclipse. And it's considered a bad omen and bad luck by almost every civilization on Earth. And that's what you're seeing. A perfect alignment of all these circles. And it's fine. I mean, if you think putting all your eggs in one basket is the answer to it, congratulations to you. But it's a militarily disastrous strategy. And make no mistake, we are in a civilizational war. So if you want to adopt a military strategy, zero redundancy, and repeat failure, congratulations to you. I mean, I'm out of this.
That's very classic Abhijit, the least worst option. So, okay, I mean, we may agree, we may disagree, but let's continue. So I have next question is about, I understand and support the CAA, but what if a Muslim person who came before 2014 took an Indic name and claimed citizenship? How do we deal with this? So it's basically how do we deal with the frauds under CAA? So anyone can answer this question.
Okay, I will take this question because
please, sir.
I have dealt with the citizenship issues I am in Rajasthan, and I dealt with it as a district magistrate way back in the 90s. Things haven't changed much because the system has remained pretty much the same. Well, according to me, it's virtually impossible for anyone to do that, because anybody who comes across from Pakistan, the kind of visa restrictions and the kind of reporting conditions that are imposed on them, it's virtually impossible for them to go under the radar. It's just not going to happen. They're very stringent. They get a visa for one particular place. If a visa says Jodhpur, so they have to stick in Jodhpur. If it says Bardmer, they can't go beyond Bardmer. Somebody stepped out to do some labor work from Jodhpur to Jaisalmer. He was immediately caught. Because they also have to do periodical reporting to the local Thana. That Thana is also prescribed. So it's pretty much impossible. And all this SSB and everybody, they are all keeping. And look at this. I mean, they are not in millions. Unlike the Rohingyas, who may be in millions, these people are not in millions. They are in thousands. So they're getting about, I think the last count, if I remember right, they're getting about 20,000 citizenships in Rajasthan every year. So that's not very much. According to me, for a guy to come on a legal visa and disappear is impossible. Somebody comes in illegally, he can stay under the radar. He can stay under the radar very happily. And because all these guys from Pakistan are all coming under regular visas, this question doesn't arise.
Thank you, sir. So it's a very important question which is coming in by Rajat Shukla. It basically asks about the Kerala. Kerala is the most radicalized state when it comes to the ISIS or Islamic Jihad. In fact, one of my friends who works in the intelligence, who is a Muslim from Bihar, he told me this thing, that the only people he's really scared of are from the Kerala. So he deals with these ISIS recruits and everyone, and he says they scare me too. How do we deal with this kind of radicalization in Kerala, and why is it happening? Because they are so prosperous, they're politically empowered, there is no discrimination apparently in Kerala. Why the radicalization? Abhijit, would you like to take this up?
Look, Kerala Muslims have always been extremely radical. Don't forget the Mopla movement was another crazy ISIS-style Khilafat movement. Never forget that. I know Gandhi called them my brave Moplas. That's like saying my beloved teddy bear Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi. These fellows were crazy, murderous thugs. They raped, they killed, they ran an ISIS-style state. They were nut jobs of the next level. To normalize that rubbish, to completely wipe that out from our history books, all these people who talk about historical fidelity in our history books are very clear they don't want to talk about the historical truth of either Tipu Sultan or the Moplas or anything of that sort. Okay, so Kerala has always had this issue of radicalization, number one. Number two, remember what has been happening out here is, people keep saying that, Indian Muslims have not really made it on the global stage of international terrorism. This is largely true, and it has nothing to do with Sufism. The Sufism nonsense that everybody falls for is the biggest load of codswallop you will ever hear. It has to do with economic strata. Why are so many Europeans joining ISIS? It's because they have a much higher income, even when they are on employment benefits, on state support, on social support. Their per capita income is still fairly high, and Europeans are, by their very definition, internationalized. In India, that social strata and therefore the ability to do much, economic agency is much less. And the moment they come up to a certain agency, you see the radicalization, mostly the mental radicalization. I'm not talking about the Ashrafia, programmed mobs that Sanjay ji is talking about. I'm talking about self-radicalization and terrorism. They exist in a sort of middle class where you achieve a certain point of living, you have leisure time, and then you start getting radicalized. Okay. In Kerala, this has been exacerbated because there is no this kind of Kerala model, biggest nonsense you'll ever hear about, is the Gulf surplus model. Okay, they all go work in the Gulf, and it is all the surplus of the Gulf that comes back and funds this farce called the Kerala model. If the Kerala model were so good, then West Bengal should have also been equally developed. West Bengal is extremely backward. Remember that. So if communism, same party running both states, why is one performing so well, one performing very badly? It's because it's all Gulf money that's coming back. Now in the Gulf itself, you've gone through this cycle of Wahhabism and, well, Salafism, not Wahhabism, Salafism is the proper term to be used out here. And Wahhabis, this sort of Wahhabi radicalization is what you're seeing again. Not that Kerala needed much radicalization. They've always been radical. So it's a lot of things: increased money, increased global connectivity, and this knowledge of international Islamic discourses, and pre-existing violent radicalization in Kerala.
I will supplement Abhijit. I agree with most of what he says, except that two things I'll add. And there's a full chapter on the Khilafat movement in the book, so people can refer to it also. You see, the Kerala style radicalization, what you're talking about, he's talking about Mupla riots. But the fact is that this whole belt, the Mupla belt, was like that even in the 18th and 19th century. And way back in, I think it is 1843 or so, the East India Company came up with some very strong punitive laws to be able to contain this band, this murderous band of Muplas. So these are, these people, they had that, along with the supremacist doctrine, they also had the supremacist racism, because a number of them were actually, they came down from Arabia in ancient times. So this very, very deadly combination of racism and supremacism has ruled in Kerala, the northern Kerala, for the longest time. And the British were able to contain it for about 60, 70 years. But then as soon as this Khilafat thing happened, the nonsense of Khilafat, where Gandhiji suddenly decided that India needed a Khilafat, and India needed to go under the Muslim rule all over again. I think I mentioned this fact again and again. I'll mention it here also. It was the Khilafat Committee which started the non-cooperation movement on the 1st of August, 1920. It was not the Indian National Congress. Indian National Congress passed a resolution to join this non-cooperation only on the 7th of September, 1920. So this kind of a, I would say, the mad petrol throwing into an already raging fire was what created the Mupla riots, so that kind of a situation. So that happened there. Then he was very right, says that they were very powerful and they've always been economically well off. He talked about Sufism. Well, this is not the occasion to talk in detail about Sufism. It can take another 1 or 2 hours. But then I mentioned this, the Barelvis are a federation of the Sufis. Aurangzeb was a Sufi. The Fatawa Alamgiri is a Sufi doctrine. Both the major denominations, the Devbandis and Barelvis, they honor Sufism. So there is nothing very peaceful about Sufis.
Yes, I mean, many people have made that point that Sufism was not very peaceful as it is made out to be. This question is coming from two people actually, that what is the possibility of a civil war breaking out in Pakistan, or Pakistan actually breaking into different pieces, that it just can't hold. Is that true? Personally, I do not think that is true, because Pakistan is a very strong state. But what's your take, our defense expert, Abhijit?
Look, Pakistan is already in a civil war. I mean, you look at the security in Islamabad, or any Pakistani city. It's not the tamasha security checks that you get at 5-star hotels here. You know, those puny little guards, not armed, checking the bottom of your car with a mirror when they don't even know what they're looking for. Even at 12 o'clock at night without light, they'll pretend to look at it with a mirror under your car, and opening your dicky and your bonnet to check if there's a bomb. They've been given no training in finding out. They won't even know what a bomb looks like. This tamasha security is not what you have in Pakistan. In Pakistan, when you're entering a mall, when you're entering any public place, it is extraordinary security. Islamabad is like a fortress. Going from one part of town to another, the kind of security checks you have to endure. Okay, so they are already in a civil war. They've been a civil war for a long time. They had the Bangladesh civil war, they have the Balochistan civil war, they have the Khyber Pakhtunkhwa civil war. And these are proper wars. There is air power used. Fighters go. In fact, there was a photo on airliners.net which got taken off of a Pakistani plane dropping of a Pakistani F-16 dropping a Pave 1000 kg bomb, when it was realized that it was actually doing counterinsurgency operations out there. Okay, we don't drop 1,000-pound bombs on our population here. We have insurgencies. They are in a perpetual state of civil war. They can deal with it. I think India's worst problems are still, nowhere near what is with Pakistan, number one. Number two, the problem with Indians also is, we want to hear the worst about the others, and we never want the worst to know the worst about us. Whereas I was always taught with planning, you plan for the worst and hope for the best. Here, the Indian thing is you plan for the best and you hope for the best also, which never happens. But this is the Indian mindset. And then people turn around and say, "Tu kitna negative hai, bhai." The third thing that we need to understand is Pakistan is extremely strong as a country because of the sheer ruthlessness of its leaders. They don't let crap like human rights get in the way of doing what they need to do. They will play off one against the other. The problem, see, if you've only got king cobras, they'll all start, they might rise up in rebellion against you. But if you keep everything like a coastal taipan, a king cobra, bandit crate, whatever kind of thousands of different kinds of poisonous things, and they never put all their eggs in one basket. They put it in every single Islamic extremist denomination basket. They keep getting them to fight each other. Marte kaun hai? It's the ordinary people who die. The elite doesn't give a damn. So it's good. It's all good. They're going to go on just fine. I have full faith in the future of Pakistan.
So, is this a question? Is that are we not taking right steps today to protect Hindu against the what is called the Red Jihad, the alliance between the Islamists and the Naxals? We see sometimes that is unfolding in front of our eyes, in the urban centers. So, Sanjay sir, would you like to shed some light on this thing, this Red Jihad scenario? 2.5 years.
I think we'll probably keep our answers short because I've just been told from the back room that there are many questions, so we'll keep our answers short. I definitely do think that there's a lot more that requires to be done. We are not even addressing the radicalization part correctly because all the time, we keep doing these things like Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam and all that. It only feeds into the radicalization. They laugh at us. They know because they have been doing this for over 150 years. They have this as a practiced art. And we come up with these same hackneyed ideas to counter them. It's not going to happen. You need to take it head on. First of all, you have to be truthful. You have to have the courage to speak the inconvenient truth and be politically incorrect if you need to be.
There's another question. Should India have given American air bases access during the Afghan war? I think this is not a very directly relevant question, but Abhijit, your quick take on it if you want.
We did
basically,
offer
should
them
we? Okay, so should we intervene in the Afghan? Now going forward, do we?
There is the tyranny of geography. We don't have a contiguous border with Afghanistan. India offered our bases up. America said, we're going to go through Pakistan. And then who was it? Some Armstrong. Richard Armitage used to look like he was a professional boxer. He was built like a stub. He called up Musharraf and threatened to bomb Pakistan into the dark ages if they didn't offer them bases. They should have, of course, targeted Pakistan. With the benefit of hindsight, we all know that. But what happened. We did offer bases, though. This was one good thing we did. Vajpayee used to consider lots of things. He did, seriously consider sending troops to Iraq. We did offer our air bases. If you go through his speech that he gave on TV, he did offer, or it was either him or Jaswant Singh that offered it on the record. Okay, so all of these things were offered, but it certainly tells you a lot about the current caliber of policy making, where even the Prime Minister in his speeches falls for the Sufism is peaceful nonsense, which is completely unacademic. You really have to think about the scholarly training and the academic record of whoever wrote that speech for him. And, this every time I hear Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, I just zonk out. It's one of the most useless terms you can ever hear about. If a Prime Minister uses it, they should be impeached. It is, it is not... it is not what a statesman uses. It is what an appeaser uses. Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam in the Indian context is what Neville Chamberlain is in the Nazi Germany context.
Okay.
Strong word.
So Tushar is asking, do we see any possibility of a Muslim leader who can take the leadership of the Muslims in India outside the hand of the Maulana class or the Ashrafia class? I think the CA was outside their hands anyways, right? So
I don't see anyone at the moment. In fact, I asked this question directly to Arif Muhammad Khan Sahab. I asked him, see, your interpretations of your scriptures are wonderful, but tell me who listens to you. And then I added for good measure, I said, you're not an alim, you don't have taqleed, you don't have authority, so why should anyone listen to you? And he agreed with me immediately. The good man that he is, he agreed. He said that you have caught the nub of the problem. As long as there is taqleed, people like us will be heard only by the Hindus, and other faiths, they will not be heard by the Muslims.
So this is a question which says, why is the government not really regulating or controlling what's going on in the madrasas? Because, in almost every Islamic country, the madrasas and mosques are completely controlled by the state. So they keep a very close watch on what's happening there. Why has not India done that?
Political correctness, what else? Because as you said, rightly said, that in Arabia, I still remember one beautiful intervention made by, I think, the foreign minister of UAE. And somebody was asking some question, and he told them that, look, let me tell you that as long as you do not give up political correctness, and as long as you think that you know the Middle East better than us, you are in for great trouble, and you're going to face something far worse than you're facing. He was telling this to Europeans. And I think it is correct even in the Indian context.
So we have another question, which is not really related to this topic. It's about the bureaucratic reforms and how to make them more specialized, and be able to deal with this kind of national security issues.
I think we can let this go. This is not a relevant question.
Next question.
I have agreed with Abhijit to do a full session on bureaucracy. So that.
We are waiting for it.
That is a session. That's going to be a massacre.
We can keep that question for that session.
And I think this is a repeat of the question which was asked earlier, is that how do you deal with the fraud under the CAA, that people who are fraudulently entering from Bangladesh and all those things. So I think this question has been done, but in case any one of you want to add something to this.
I think that's done. So this is probably the last question, I'm being told.
Okay, so it's a fun question, is saying that have the Chinese PLA, the Indian Maoists, the ISI, and the Congress have ganged up against the Hindu India, and are they winning? Abhijit? It's a Congress question, so you have to answer it.
Yes, it is, because see, the communists have historically, they play on intersectionality. Before, it used to be political intersectionality. Today, it's all kinds of rubbish like gender, la-di-da-di-da. But remember, once in power, the communists managed to do what nobody else can ever do anywhere. The communists managed to de-Islamize the whole of Central Asia, which was the hub of religious radicalism coming into India. Never forget that. It wasn't Arabs who came into India and radicalized us. It was Turks from Central Asia and the Russians, the Soviets, not the Russian Empire, not the Tsars, even though they conquered the area. It was the Communist Party of the Soviet Union that destroyed Turkic culture in that region, made them all drink alcohol, eat pork, okay, think of themselves as Europeans, to an extent that when I was in Bukhara at the Madrasa of Ulugh Beg, because I wear a kurta pajama, I get invited in for smoked pork fat and vodka sitting in a madrasa. This is what the Qadi there, or I don't know what his official designation is, was offering me. This is what China is doing. So behind all this thing about, oh, we respect gender rights, we respect minority rights, la-di-da, look at how China and Russia treat gender. There wasn't a single female in the Politburo for the longest amount of time. There is still no woman in the Chinese Politburo. And they keep talking about socialist revolution and all that nonsense. Find me one homosexual in the Soviet Politburo or the Chinese Politburo, none. Find me one trans person, none. Arey, wo to token. Find me one minority, none. This is how. So you see, I wish Islamists on the communists and communists on Islamists. They deserve each other. They are made for each other. And like, Voltaire used to say, religion started when the first scoundrel met the first moron. You figure out for yourself who is the scoundrel out here and who is the moron. I have a very clear definition. But the Communist Party of China and Islamism belong to each other. They deserve each other. I hope they come together. Thank you.
We have the Iran example, of course, where the scoundrels and morons met each other, and we know what happened.
So I think that was the last of the question, and it brings us to the end of the discussion. It was a wonderful discussion. Thank you, Abhijit. Thank you, Sanjay, sir. And I hope all of you are going to buy this book by our latest author on these matters. He has written a wonderful series, fiction series, but I think this is his first non-fiction book. Am I right, sir?
This is my first non-fiction book.
So
now I have written the trilogy of Bhagwan Krishna. But even there, a lot of politics is involved. If somebody knows how to read between the lines.
So very best wishes you for this book. And Abhijit, always a pleasure to listen to you.
It really is a fantastic book. I was reading that book and, I couldn't put it down. I have a bad viral fever. And in spite of that, I was like, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. And see, the thing is, if you know a lot of the names, you can read between the lines. I think we will save that session, reading between the lines, for after your retirement is formal, sir.
My retirement got formal day before yesterday.
Oh, yay!
Congratulations.
So one more session then.
Okay, so thank you, audience, and we end this show here.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Abhinavji. Thank you, Abhijit.
Jai Bhavani.